Spicy perfumes are some of the most loved perfumes out there, but what actually goes into creating them? It turns out that a surprising story involving fake flowers and colonial empires led to a number of iconic spicy fragrances being developed and launched in the 20th century. And at the heart of all of those fragrances is one shockingly simple combination of ingredients. In this video, I'm going to tell that story and explain how 4 common perfumery ingredients can be combined together in order to create the heart and soul behind those fragrances. I'll even include a formula which you can try yourself at home. Just watch to the end of the video and you'll understand exactly why it's put together the way it is and what each of the different ingredients do. So the story starts in the early 20th century. Now at this time, floral perfumes were extremely popular. At the time, they were strongly associated with romance and luxury. And many of the perfumes being released at the time were essentially caricatures of either the smell of a single flower or some kind of bouquet of flowers. Now, this trend in perfumery occurred in response to the recent discovery of synthetic fragrance molecules. These lab-made fragrance molecules made floral notes accessible to the masses for the first time. You see, using real flowers to make perfume is extremely expensive due to the massive amounts of labor required. Now, I cover the story of how perfumers learned to create flower smells from these synthetic molecules in detail in my online perfumery course. And if you're interested in that, you can find the link in the description of this video. But in this video, we're going to focus on one floral note in particular, and that floral note is carnation. Carnation is a flower with spicy and balsamic undertones in its smell. And like a whole host of other floral smells, carnation was one that became widely accessible with the rise of synthetic perfumery. In particular, it was a minimalist carnation accord which was found in 3 famous perfumes of the time, which would lay the groundwork to create this famous spicy accord, which I'm going to introduce to you later in the video. So those perfumes were, firstly, Moment Supreme, and this was an elegant perfume launched in 1929, and it really captured the feeling of the roaring 20s. It combined an intricate bouquet of different florals with a sweet ambery base as well as cloves. Next we have Bluegrass, and this perfume was inspired by rural life in Kentucky during the Great Depression. This one was released in 1934 and it featured a very clean lavender note combined with a carnation accord. And then after those there was of course L'air du Temps, and this perfume was created just after the end of World War II, really capturing the kind of feeling of freedom and optimism at the time. It was a very light and airy perfume, but this perfume also contained a carnation accord. These were all floral perfumes with a spicy facet, and their shared secret was this minimalistic carnation accord, which was in fact just a combination really of 2 key raw materials. And those 2 raw materials created this very warm and versatile base for the fragrances. I'll introduce these now, and then later you'll see how this key combination evolved into a fully fledged spicy accord with its own unique DNA, which is now cemented in perfume history. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with the term accord, this simply means a harmony of smells in perfumery, much like a harmony of notes in music create a chord. Let's then unpick this minimal carnation accord. So the first component is eugenol, which is a spicy note, and it's naturally found in clove essential oil. And if you smell eugenol, you'll notice that it smells very similar to the smell of cloves. It's also found in other spices such as cinnamon and allspice, and it contributes to their smells too. Eugenol is actually quite common in nature, and spices aren't the only place in which it's found. Carnation is one of those places, and it's not in a small way that eugenol contributes to the unique, slightly spicy smell of the carnation flower. The second component is a molecule called benzyl salicylate. Benzyl salicylate naturally occurs in ylang ylang, which refers to the flowers of the kananga tree. And this is a tree which is native to Southeast Asia. Ylang ylang has a unique tropical creamy floral smell, and is very commonly used in perfumery. So benzyl salicylate, which again, just like eugenol, is a single molecule, this is naturally found inside, in this case, the ylang ylang flowers, and it contributes to that smell. Anyway, despite being found inside of ylang ylang, that's not generally how perfumers use it. In fact, chemists learn to synthesize benzoyl salicylate in a lab, and it's usually this synthetic benzoyl salicylate is used, and this is just because it's far cheaper to make it synthetically than actually extract it from the flowers where only very small amounts are found. But it's not only ylang ylang which benzoyl salicylate is useful in recreating the smell of. It's also useful in creating a whole host of other floral smells, and carnation is a flower in particular which it is particularly well suited to due to its quite warm, radiant smell, which kind of matches the warm, spicy floral smell of carnation. So then, to summarize, eugenol plus benzoyl salicylate together equals a minimalist sketch of the smell of carnations. L'air du Temps, the most iconic fragrance we've introduced so far, actually used a 4.5:1 ratio of benzoyl salicylate to eugenol, and this really exemplifies a traditional ratio for these two fragrance compounds. And you may think that sounds like a lot of benzoyl salicylate compared to the eugenol, but once you've smelled these two aroma chemicals yourself, you'll understand why. You see, benzoyl salicylate is very soft and subtle. It creates this kind of delicate and faint scent cloud, and this is actually so faint that some people don't even really smell it at all. Eugenol, on the other hand, is very potent with this kind of bold, spicy smell that really comes out at you. So the 4.5:1 ratio of benzoyl salicylate to eugenol prevents the eugenol completely dominating the benzoyl salicylate in the accord. Let's take a brief departure from our accord. It's important that I explain this next concept to you before you can fully understand how our simple carnation accord evolved into this insanely popular spicy sibling. I'm now going to introduce you to the genre of Oriental perfumes. So the term Oriental was traditionally used in perfumery to describe a whole genre of perfumes which contain notes such as amber, vanilla, spices, and woods like sandalwood. Guerlain's extremely famous perfume Shalimar is a perfect early example of this. The term Oriental comes from Europe back in the 19th century, back when the culture in the West held this romanticized view of exotic lands and cultures in the East, in particular India and East Asia. Rare woods and exotic spices were brought back into Europe via colonial era trade routes, and these became a sought after luxury which perfumers then began to incorporate into their perfumes at the time. Nowadays, the term Oriental has fallen out of fashion since it's more commonly now seen as offensive due to perpetuating stereotypes and a colonial worldview, although some perfumers differ, saying that the use of the word in perfumery is purely descriptive and categorical due to its historic use. So, how do these Oriental perfumes relate to our famous accord? Well, if the roots of our accord originated in more floral-leaning perfumes, then it really flourished into its best-known form when the relationship between eugenol and benzoyl salicylate, which we've already discussed, crossed paths with the Oriental genre of perfumery. The resulting fusion is illustrated by three iconic perfumes in particular, which introduced two key new ingredients to crown off our accord. Firstly, there was Youth Dew, launched in 1953, and this bold, spicy, amber, feminine fragrance was one of the defining perfumes of the 50s. It was extremely popular both with women at the time and the men who smelled it on them. Then in 1977, Opium was released by Yves Saint Laurent, and this shared similarities with both Youth Dew and Shalimar, that infamous Oriental perfume. Opium became one of the most iconic Oriental perfumes of all time, and it's still popular today. Finally, in 1984, Chanel released Coco, a bold, spicy floral perfume. And this perfume was inspired by Coco Chanel's image as a strong, independent businesswoman. Again, it incorporated this same combination of ingredients, which I'm about to reveal to you. So then, what were these two new materials which were added to our simple carnation accord to make these three perfumes so seductive? Firstly, there was patchouli. Patchouli is one of the most widely used raw materials in perfumery. Now, to most people, patchouli evokes these kind of heady, bohemian vibes harking back to its use in head shops ever since the 60s. To many, it's therefore a love or hate smell. But perfumers don't use patchouli for this strong, distinctive, heady smell that most people know it's for. Most people don't know this, but patchouli in tiny amounts is very important in creating lots of different structures in perfumery. And this is due to its ability to provide this quite subtle but warm, earthy undertone in fragrances. Now, the second of these two new ingredients or raw materials is hydroxycitronellal. This is a synthetic molecule, just like eugenol or benzoyl salicylate, and the discovery of this molecule famously made lily of the valley fragrances possible in perfumery for the first time. Again, this is something I cover in my online course if you're interested. So these two additions then complete our accord, which is known by perfumers as the Melis accord. So this is our famous spicy accord, the Melis accord. When added to our Carnation accord, the two new additions serve important functions in creating this full Melis accord. So the patchouli adds depth and complexity to this strong but kind of thin eugenol. Eugenol is fairly unidimensional, spicy clove smell. So by adding the patchouli, you add this kind of earthy foundation with a lot of complexity from all the natural molecules which are found in the patchouli, and this really allows the eugenol to go and blend into this kind of spicy, complex base. Hydroxycitronellal, on the other hand, which is a kind of fresh floral smell, it really boosts up the benzoyl salicylate. It harmonizes with it very well, but it makes it much less timid and meek in the background, and it adds a more full and rounded, fresh, slightly sweet floral aspect to it. Actually, the sweetness of the hydroxycitronellal really blends with the natural sweetness in the benzoyl salicylate. Now, there are quite a number of other materials too, which were often found in the context of the Melis accord, so they are also fairly synonymous with it. The most important of these probably being coumarin, which is a synthetic sweet hay-like note. But then also other woody notes were very important, other spicy notes, sweet balsamic notes, so these are your kind of deep resinous notes, and then also ambery notes, and rose was probably the most common floral note used in the context of the accord. So at the start of the video, I promised I'd share with you a formula. So now I'm going to share with you a formula for my own version of the Melis accord, and I'm going to walk you through each of the raw materials inside of it. In this formula, my materials are already diluted in alcohol to make them easier to work with and more economical to blend with. And this will also leave us with an accord at a strength which is representative of how strong the Melis accord would probably be expected to be in a realistic perfume. So if you'd like a deeper explanation of that, why and how to dilute things, I'll put a link to another video I made below explaining all of that. Firstly, I'll take my pipette and weigh out 0.9 grams of benzoyl salicylate into my sample bottle. Next, I'll take a fresh, clean pipette and measure out 0.2 grams of eugenol. It's important we use a clean pipette every time to prevent cross-contamination. Then I'll add 0.75 grams of fluorosa, also known as floral, which is my preferred lily note. Of course, you can use any lily molecule in your version of the accord. Then I'll add 0.25 grams of patchouli to complete the core of the Melis accord. This patchouli in particular is patchouli cur, a special, refined and extremely elegant patchouli oil made specifically for fine perfumery. Next, I added 0.1 grams of cinnamon absolute, a personal choice just to push the warm, sweet, spicy side of the accord. Finally, I added 0.3 grams of vanillin, diluted this time down to 1%. Vanillin is a powerful, sweet, vanilla-smelling molecule, but when just a touch is added like this, it sweetens the whole accord without introducing an overt vanilla smell. Vanilla and vanillin is also very commonly used in oriental perfumes. So what does it smell like overall? Dip a scent strip into your sample bottle and hold it up to your nose. Well, all of the components blend together really quite seamlessly into this completely new smell. It's rich, it's opulent, and it's complex and spicy. Honestly, this simple accord on its own really smells like a luxury perfume. It's a beautiful smell, and it's really something that's worth making and smelling if you can. So if you want to try making this accord for yourself, but you've not done perfumery before, where do you get started? Well, you can purchase all of the equipment at the Fragrance Foundry with the equipment starter kit, as well as the exact same raw materials which I used for my formula, including the perfumery grade patchouli, as well as the not so common cinnamon absolute. I've left the link in the description below this video in case you're interested. And if you're in Europe, the Fragrance Foundry also began shipping raw materials to Europe this month. Furthermore, if you're interested in the steps going from a concept like this to a formula like this, then definitely check out my online perfumery course, which is also linked in the description of this video. Okay, so now you've made your Melissa Accord, how can you make it your own or actually use it in a finished perfume? Well, all of the perfumes that we discussed in this video aren't just the Melissa Accord alone. Each uses its own unique variation of the Melissa Accord and then contextualizes it by using its own unique perfume structure around it. So Bluegrass, while dominated by clean aldehydes and rustic lavender, contains 3 of the 4 Melissa Accord's components: eugenol, benzyl salicylate, and hydroxycitronellal. So these really are forming the Carnation Accord there, but they also essentially come together to pretty much smell like the Melissa Accord, only the patchouli is missing, but it's still pretty recognizable. Pretty much the same situation for L'air du Temps. This time it's the isoeugenol and ylang ylang which really combine with the benzyl salicylate and the eugenol to make its own unique, what I would say is really an exotic floral accord. Again, this contains 3 of the 4 Melissa components, just missing out on the patchouli. And then when we move into the Oriental style ones, Youthdew features amyl salicylate, which is a different salicylate from benzyl salicylate, as well as cedral acetate, which is a clean woody note alongside all 4 components of the Melissa Accord. Opium adds the Ambrine Accord alongside the Melissa Accord. The Ambrine Accord, if you don't know what that is another accord just like the Melissa Accord, which is the other very famous key accord traditionally used in Oriental perfumes. Now, in Opium, you have a lot more animalic notes, the woody and spicy notes are pushed, and you've also got more of the rose facet, so that's really making that unique. It also incorporates coumarin, which is a sweet hay-like note, as well as vertofix, which is a very common clean woody synthetic molecule. And then Coco by Chanel borrows a lot from Opium, in fact, but it replaces the hydroxycitronellal with lyral, another lily note. So that's similar to how I replace hydroxycitronellal with Florosa in my version of the Accord. Now in Coco, it uses a lot of hedione, which is another famous floral perfumery synthetic molecule, as well as the more modern Isoi Super, which is a velvety woody note. Now overall in Coco, since they really push the floral notes, it almost brings it a little bit full circle back to something more similar to Moment Supreme, which was the floral style perfume we talked about at the beginning. Now, to create your own unique version of the Melissa Accord, you need to choose which elements you want to really feature. For example, in my version, I added cinnamon absolute and vanillin to, create the unique effect I wanted to create. But those 2 aren't strictly necessary by any means, and you have many more options to choose from. For example, coumarin is one of the most common additions, as well as woody notes like vertofix or balsamic notes like labdanum. Vetiver is another traditional woody note which is very common. Then once you've got your own unique Melissa Accord, the next stage is developing your accord into a perfume. So for example, you could add things like musks to really soften and pad out the base note, make sure you've got the longevity there. You could add some florals to really open out the heart and make it a little bit more radiant, or even just a touch if you don't want them to come through in the smell too strongly. And then you'd probably want to add a top note to really create this diffusive opening, create a little bit of sparkle just when you spray the perfume. So bergamot would be a very traditional note you could use for that, but you've got so many choices. You could choose other things like pink pepper, or even a fruity note like building your own peach accord or something like that. So if you're unsure how to do any of that, then just subscribe to my channel for more videos just like this, breaking down perfumery in an easy to follow way. And of course, if you're looking for a much more comprehensive structured learning path, then like I said, do remember to check out my online course. Anyway, that's it then, a comprehensive guide to the Melissa Accord and how perfumers have harnessed it over the decades to make countless iconic spicy fragrances. Let me know in the comments if you found this style of video interesting, and let me know which topics in perfumery you'd be interested for me to cover next.